Good evening, everybody. We're in Exodus chapter 8. If you want to jump there in your Bibles, Exodus chapter 8. So just to recap a little bit before we jump into chapter 8 and we'll read and I'll say a prayer before we do. But remember, we've been talking about the process of God delivering his people out of out of Egypt, Moses helping deliver God's people out of Egypt. We've gotten the first plague back in chapter 7. We've seen the signs God has shown to his people by Moses in order to make them believe that he has sent Moses for this purpose. And he has shown some of those signs as well to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh has hardened his heart. We talked about at the end of class on Sunday, that Pharaoh saw the blood from the Nile, and all the buckets and all the bins and everything was filled with blood instead of water, and yet it was, when he was returning to his house, it was as if he didn't witness any of it. He took none of it to heart. He simply put it away and just kind of defied the sign from God. And so we're going to kind of continue along with this journey through Exodus, looking at these plagues over the next few classes. And so chapter 8 dives into the next 3 plagues that God sends on Egypt. Let's have a word of prayer. We'll do the reading, and then we'll kind of discuss what we see here in chapter 8. Let's bow. Our Father in heaven, thank you for this wonderful time now we have to study your word. We thank you for the gift of your word and the knowledge that it provides to us. And we thank you for one another here to be able to lean on and to study together and to ask questions together and to grow together. Please bless our time here this evening and all the classes, that we continue to grow here at Brownsburg and strive to know your will and to be more like Christ. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right. Exodus chapter 8. Let's start reading. It says, Then the Lord said to Moses, Go in to Pharaoh and say to him, Thus says the Lord, Let my people go, that they may serve me. But if you refuse to let them go, behold, I will plague all your country with frogs. The Nile shall swarm with frogs that shall come up into your house and into your bedroom and on your bed and into the houses of your servants and your people and into your ovens and your kneading bowls. The frogs shall come upon you and on your people and on all your servants. And the Lord said to Moses, Say to Aaron, Stretch out your hand with your staff over the rivers, over the canals, and over the pools, and make frogs come up on the land of Egypt. So Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt. But the magicians did the same by their secret arts and made frogs come up on the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh called Moses and Aaron and said, Plead with the Lord to take away the frogs from me and from my people, and I will let the people go to sacrifice to the Lord. Moses said to Pharaoh, Be pleased to command me when I am to plead for you and for your servants and for your people, that the frogs be cut off from you and your houses and be left only in the Nile. And he said, Tomorrow. Moses said, Be it as you say, so that you may know that there is no one like the Lord our God. The frogs shall go away from you and your houses and your servants and your people. They shall be left only in the Nile. So Moses and Aaron went out from Pharaoh, and Moses cried to the Lord about the frogs as he had agreed with Pharaoh. And the Lord did according to the word of Moses. The frogs died out in the houses, the courtyards, and the fields, and they gathered them together in heaps, and the land stank. But when Pharaoh saw there was a respite, he hardened his heart and would not listen to them as the Lord had said. Then the Lord said to Moses, Say to Aaron, Stretch out your staff and strike the dust of the earth, so that it may become gnats in all the land of Egypt. And they did so. Aaron stretched out his hand with his staff and struck the dust of the earth, and there were gnats on man and beast. All the dust of the earth became gnats in all the land of Egypt. The magicians tried by their secret arts to produce gnats, but they could not. So there were gnats on man and beast. Then the magicians said to Pharaoh, This is the finger of God. But Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he wouldn't listen to them, as the Lord had said. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Rise up early in the morning and present yourself to Pharaoh, as he goes out to the water, and say to him, 'Thus says the Lord, let my people go, that they may serve me. Or else, if you will not let my people go, behold, I will send swarms of flies on you, and your servants, and your people, and into your houses. And the houses of the Egyptians shall be filled with swarms of flies, and also the ground on which they stand. But on that day I will set apart the land of Goshen, where my people dwell, so that no swarms of flies shall be there, that you may know that I am the Lord in the midst of the earth. Thus I will put a division between my people and your people. Tomorrow this sign shall happen.' And the Lord did so. There came great swarms of flies into the house of Pharaoh and into his servants' houses. Throughout all the land of Egypt, the land was ruined by the swarms of flies. Then Pharaoh called Moses and Aaron and said, 'Go, sacrifice to your God within the land.' But Moses said, 'It would not be right to do so, for the offerings we shall sacrifice to the Lord our God are an abomination to the Egyptians. If we sacrifice offerings abominable to the Egyptians before their eyes, will they not stone us? We must go 3 days' journey into the wilderness and sacrifice to the Lord our God as he tells us.' So Pharaoh said, 'I will let you go to sacrifice to the Lord your God in the wilderness, only you must not go very far away. Plead for me.' Then Moses said, 'Behold, I am going out from you, and I will plead with the Lord that the swarms of flies may depart from Pharaoh, from his servants, and from his people tomorrow. Only let not Pharaoh cheat again by not letting the people go to sacrifice to the Lord.' So Moses went out from Pharaoh and prayed to the Lord. And the Lord did as Moses asked, and removed the swarms of flies from Pharaoh, from his servants, from his people. Not one remained. But Pharaoh hardened his heart this time also, and did not let the people go." And that's chapter 8 of Exodus. All right, so we're kind of getting into the next few chapters. We'll really be focusing in on each plague. Chapter 9 has the next 3, and then chapter 10 as well, kind of following this same pattern that we're going to see. So trying to recap a little bit more before we dive into chapter 8 here. What's some of the main themes that have been carrying over across these chapters that we've been talking about the last few weeks? What are some common themes that you're seeing, or character traits that we're seeing, or messages that you think is important to get across that's popping up here in Exodus? Yeah, John.
God is going to prove that he is God. He is going to prove to those people that they need to look to him if they're going to accomplish it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's definitely been one of the key things that we've been talking about is God's going to be displaying who he is. And it's not just for the sake of the Egyptians, not just for the sake of Pharaoh, but he's trying to display to all those present here who he is, right? Who is this Yahweh, this I am that I am? And, he's talked about revealing more of himself now to these people than even was revealed to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? So God is continuing to reveal more about who he is and display his power to the Egyptians, to Pharaoh, but also to his people. And we're seeing a common thread so far of the people being ignorant of who God is and questioning who God is. Not just Pharaoh questioning who God is, who is this Lord that I should answer to him, but also Moses, right, a few chapters back, questioning the intentions of God. Why did you come here to do evil to this people? You haven't yet released them. You have not yet delivered them from anything, right? Questioning God's intentions, questioning God's, integrity, as it were. And so God's still maintaining this messaging of, you're going to know, so that you may know I am the Lord. And so, this is going to keep popping up, and I think when we read enough chapters here, hopefully it's sinking in, this is what God wants us to know from these stories. So as much as it's good to know the plagues and it's good to know all the characters and everything, there's something he's hitting us over the head with over and over and over again, and it's about understanding who he is through all this. Go ahead, John.
We haven't come to it yet, but these magicians or these guys are, Pharaoh has doing the same thing as Moses. They had to admit this is the finger of God. Now, when they did that made them admit that God is God, other than all those gods that the Egyptians worshiped. There is a God of the Israelites that is someone has to be contended with.
Yeah, we'll get to that a little bit more detail, but yeah, they have to admit, even they admit, like, hey, the evidence is overwhelming, and I think that really ties in a lot for the messaging with Pharaoh that we're seeing with the hardening of the heart and how he responds to that. And so that's definitely a key part of the chapter as well. So let's dive into chapter 8 specifically, because it picks up just right after chapter 7. It was 7 days had passed with the blood in the Nile and all throughout the land of Egypt. And so now we pick up in chapter 8, and God's sending Moses and Aaron to Pharaoh. And so what happens we know the second one's frogs, but I guess when I was reading this in prep, I kind of forgot all the extra details it goes into with the frogs. And I think I told you guys last week, I hate frogs. I hate them. Like, I probably would have quit after the water to blood, but I definitely would have quit once I heard this. Like, I didn't even need to see the frogs. If he told me frogs are coming, I'm leaving. I don't get jumpy about a lot of stuff, but frogs are just awful creatures. And I think that's why God leads off with them. Like, he didn't pick snakes, guys. So, like, if anybody gives me trash for being afraid of frogs, like, God thought they were pretty serious. So I like my stance there. But what details does it go into about the frogs? So we know it's frogs, but, like, what does it say happens with the frogs? Yeah, Megan? Yeah, they're everywhere, right? They're just going to cover everything, right? Awful. This is so, I don't even want to do this chapter. It's just like so awful me thinking about this. The flies and the gnats, it just seems like, God starts real bad, gives them a couple of easier plagues after this. But it's so awful to think of. Have you seen any large assembly of anything? People, animals, you get to where it's covering the ground, it's kind of just naturally terrifying, right? Sure, maybe it's kind of cool if you see a huge swarm of people to where you can't even see the grass, like everybody's just everywhere that you can't even see the ground that they're standing on. It's just so packed in at like a stadium or a concert or something like that. But all over the floor, all over you, in your house, yeah, I don't think I'm sleeping super well that for that plague. I'll ask you this because I'm sure a lot of people. You ever been to stayed at a house near the beach, and sand is just everywhere? You'll go and you'll wash your feet off if you went to the beach, or take your shower and you'll get it super clean, and then it's just like you sit somewhere and it's like, oh, there's sand on the couch. Oh, there's sand on the floor. If you're it's everywhere. And so, your one task is all right, let's make sure it's not in my bed when I go to sleep at night. But sand just gets everywhere, right? And it's that kind of imagery of just everywhere you walk, everywhere you look, the frogs are everywhere. And it just covers the land. It just consumes them to where you can't avoid it. And I do think a lot of this messaging of the plagues as well is still in that pairing of when we talk about that heart of Pharaoh and how he turned away and acted as if like that first plague never happened. God's not giving you these small, concentrated plagues that, hey, only a few people in Egypt are suffering with, are going to see the real bad parts of it. It's so in your face, like there's nowhere you can turn. You're going to be confronted with the power of God. Go ahead, John.
Well, we haven't brought out about the kneading bed. That the kneading has to only mean one thing. Where they make the bread, where they make their flour mix and that kind of stuff. And then, you need that bread.
So you're thinking this is where some frog bread got in? Yeah, it's everywhere. It's just, ruining the supplies. You're not drinking the water with a bunch of frogs in it. You're not eating the food with frogs all in it. But yeah, it's all consuming, right? The power of God here on display. But what happens kind of in the aftermath of this, before we even get to the next plague, there's kind of some back and forth that kind of repeats itself over the next few chapters. But there's some back and forth with Pharaoh and with Moses and Aaron. And so, what's Pharaoh ask of Moses and Aaron after this takes place? Yeah, he asked them to plead with the Lord to take away the frogs from me and from my people. And then he says, what? If you do that, what do you get? What do we get? Hey, yeah, just do this and I'll let you go. Right? And so it almost seems like, oh, well, success, mission accomplished, we're going to be good, right? But Moses says, okay, you do this, but, make sure you follow your word, and, we'll have this a couple times back and forth. And he's going to take away the frogs and all that stuff, but takes away the frogs, but doesn't just make them all vanish, does it? When God stops the plague, what happens to all the frogs? They just die. Even the end of the plague is like the worst part, right? I'm not sure what's worse, a dead frog or a live frog. They're pretty much the exact same in terms of awfulness. But they're just everywhere now, right? And now you're kind of just confronted with as you're cleaning all this up, these frogs covering the whole land. And, we don't get a whole lot of great understanding of the amount of time, but however many people there are in Egypt, covering the entire land is going to take a bit of time to clean up. And I'm assuming their sanitation department is not as swift as ours is. And I know, even today we got questions about, why aren't they picking up my trash yet? It's not, so, imagine back then something covering all the land of Egypt, and they've got to clean that up and pile it up. And did you guys notice what it said about the land once they cleaned it all up? Stunk, right? And he used that terminology, and he used that phrasing last chapter, didn't it? About the smell from the Nile, right? Just the odor, it's kind of like a lasting message with this, right? Just what God can do to this great kingdom and how he can, make it kind of revolting, right? Nobody's going to want to, it's nobody's looking upon it with fondness anymore, or as a powerful entity, because it stinks. It's covered in dead things. It's at the mercy of a greater power. And so he asks for this. Moses goes and he pleads to God to remove it. And what happens? What's Pharaoh's response then? In verse 15. Yeah, he went back on his word, and I think it's interesting how in this one it gives us a little bit more background of what his thought process was as well. It doesn't, the next one it kind of just says, hey, he refuses, he did not let them go. But in verse 15, notice it says, when Pharaoh saw that there was a respite, like when there was a break, when there was a moment of peace, right? Oh, okay, yeah, you're not going, right? Once he saw the peace that was brought in, he goes back on his word. Go ahead, Anders.
Just kind of curious about frogs. I guess universally, symbolically, they center on transformation, rebirth, and fertility, stemming from their dramatic life cycle in connection to water, representing cleansing and emotional death. But I think for the Israelites, they represented an unclean animal.
Yeah, that's a good thought. I've not dug that as much deep into the symbology behind picking frogs, but the uncleanness of the animal just itself in its own form, as opposed to the fact of having millions of them or however many. Yeah, that's kind of crazy. Yeah.
The Egyptians, they considered frogs to be sacred, fertility, productivity, and so this blessing, considered to the Egyptians, would turn burdensome.
Yeah. Which really ties in well with the first plague, right? Where the Nile was this blessing, and then it becomes the burden. So very, very good points. The Pongs, back-to-back solid comments right there. Good. That's, two becoming one flesh right there, guys. Great. So, no, good comments there about the imagery, though. So, and that's what I like about these things of, as you dig into some of the history, you get some of this like, oh, how did they view some of these animals? How might have this been perceived by Joe Schmo down the road of like seeing this stuff, as opposed like we're getting the main character's view of Pharaoh and Moses and Aaron for a lot of this. But what about just the common person, the common Israelite seeing this, or the common Egyptian that's witnessing these things, and what other meanings it might have, or what God's trying to get it to see? Luke and then John.
Kind of amazes me, we are going to see Pharaoh be stubborn and hard his heart, but even in his asking for Moses to intercede, Moses gives him the benefit of saying, "You tell me what should happen." And I would have said, "Please, right now, make it happen." His answer is, "We can wait until tomorrow. I can tough it out until tomorrow." So even in that response, he's stubborn and hardening his heart, and not saying, "Intercede now," when Moses gave him an opportunity.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought too, of like just asking for it tomorrow instead of now. Yeah, that's kind of an interesting thought as well. John?
I'm just going to say, when God speaks, things happen. Now, he spoke, and he hears these frogs coming out of the Nile. I mean, just coming over the land. You just imagine those things coming out of that water and coming and covering the land of Egypt, all out of the Nile, just sweeping across the land.
Yeah, it's incredible, right? And terrifying, and like a great display of power. All the things you want to think about is just to swarm a land with pestilence or with any type of plague, which we're going to see over the next several chapters. Is a terrifying thing. And so with that as well, I do want to focus on, go ahead, Katrina.
Do you have any thoughts as to why the Israelites were also led first with promise along with the Egyptians? He doesn't separate them until the floods. So I'm assuming the Israelites also got the plagues too. Is it because they were
I don't, honestly, I'd have to look into that more. I kind of looked into it briefly. I'm not going to say I searched high and low every place, but I was curious about that too, that he waits until that third plague to say, like, specifically, my people will be untouched in this, right? I don't know if it's a matter of, the punishment for, kind of their questioning of God or anything like that. I couldn't say, but that is a good thought. Anybody? Yes?
Frogs and the gnats and the flies, and it talks about
Yeah,
But what we're gonna want, you don't grumble to the Lord, you gotta, because even, jumping ahead, even in chapter 16, they grumbled about the bread coming from heaven to feed them. When are they gonna be happy? This is my people, but you gotta learn from this.
yeah. I mean, we're going to see the Israelites have their stretch of rebellion, and a lot of the rebellion we're seeing now is going to be from Pharaoh's point of view, but and so I don't know if that ties directly into why they aren't differentiated, at least in the first few plagues, or I mean, if maybe they were and it just wasn't mentioned in the same way, or who knows what, I don't know. But for whatever reason, it specifically in verse 20 and after, it gets into I will set apart my people. But yeah, I was curious about that. David, do you have something on that?
I don't see those first few as punishments. I see those as God showing his power. And that's the reason why I went across everywhere. And Pharaoh had an opportunity to see God's power and if things were revoked. But as far as them punishing Pharaoh with that, I don't see that as punishment.
Okay, that's a thought as well, of if maybe those first few are just simply displaying God's power as opposed to maybe a sign of punishment from the Lord for the latter ones, in which God differentiates out the people, his people, with the Egyptians and Pharaoh's people. That's also another interesting thought too. I'll have to look more into that and see if I can find some other people's thoughts as well. But yeah, I thought that was interesting, though, just not mentioning it until the third plague. But then, I mean, I don't know. I feel like those first three, man, that is going to be a struggle for those three things as well. Yeah, I think it's good you're in the back, David. Let's just keep our distance from one another. We're on different wavelengths then, I guess. Yeah, Megan?
More like Florida in the middle of the winter than in the middle of the summer. If you're going to about Florida, have cool communities. But if you're going in March when it's miserable here, and you got to go through the miserableness and you get to go to cool in Florida in March, then that's pretty awesome.
So maybe this, by the third plague being done, now they're seeing, kind of enjoying even greater the peace that's not being offered by to the Egyptians, perhaps.
They don't want to leave before, they got their food and whatever. So maybe we see how they were first darkness.
Yeah, that's another interesting thought as well. So somebody's hand jump up. Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
The only thing I can think of is kind of just be speculation is, part of this process is developing the faith and the belief in God on the Israelites' part too. So they might need to experience a little bit of God's demonstration of power here. It's really just speculating, but I'm sure it would have had that impact on them, to experience those first few plagues, just like the Israelites did.
Yeah, that's a good thought as well. Kind of tying it a little bit with what David was saying about just the all display of power, right? And the Israelites needing to see that as well.
I can imagine the Israelites were probably the ones that had to show all those wrong. They were slaves.
Yeah.
They probably had to be the ones to clean it up.
That is also a good point. I think if he's not letting them go, then he's probably making them. They're still working, right? So every day he's not letting them go. They're doing something, and so can't make the bricks until you get the frogs out of the way, right? Yeah, Randy and then Dan.
So, for the last 5 decades, if somebody were to ask me, Randy, just describe the timeline of the plagues. Moses walks into Pharaoh, says, "Let my people go, or this is going to happen." Pharaoh says no. Then Moses says to Aaron, "Make it happen." Aaron makes it happen. It happens. That would have been my timeline. And up until a few minutes ago, I would have said that's the timeline. But I'm reading through a lot of these, And I don't even see where Pharaoh gets a chance to say no until the thing's underway. Am I missing? Because it looks like Moses walks up to Pharaoh and says, unless you do this, unless you let my people go, you're going to have a bunch of frogs in the land. And the next thing you know, he's turning around and telling Aaron, make it happen. And it doesn't even look like Pharaoh gets a chance to say, yes, no, maybe, let me think about it, or whatever, until it's done. I don't know if I missed something, but it just struck me that I just assumed that at the very beginning of every one of these plagues that Pharaoh said no. And I don't see that anywhere.
Yeah, I guess I know what you're saying about it doesn't always have that back and forth. I guess I kind of took it as they presented it, and I kind of inferred like, okay, I guess he said no again. That's how I took it. But that is kind of an interesting thought. Is it kind of just a sense of like, God's bringing this before you. He knows how he's going to respond. But I don't know. That is an interesting thought. I guess I kind of assumed it's just like he wasn't always just going to plug in. Moses writing this out is like, maybe I won't add the dialogue of we said this and then he said no, and then we're like, okay, this is going to happen now. But yeah, that is kind of an interesting thought. Megan?
I think that second plague is in retaliation to his failed promise. God does his promises, and he wants us to have our yeses, yes, our no's, no's. So he went against the promise to let him go, and so God retaliated against that failed promise.
Yeah, that could very, very well be with the gnats in response to Pharaoh's word, going back on his word, and then we kind of get that for just like almost like it's following right after that, and said, and the Lord said to Moses. But yeah, it could very well be just a matter of like, hey, went against his word. Like, this is also part of the plague. Obviously, he said he was going to bring these signs, but Pharaoh's response is part of the reason these signs are being brought. Go ahead, John. Oh, sorry. Hang on, John. Dan, you had a comment a while back. I think I forgot to come to you.
I did. It must have been so fun. Oh yeah. I have wondered before if the distinctions between the second plague and the third plague, and the idea that for the first two, he summoned his magicians and they were able to recreate the plague, like with the staff and the snake.
Yeah.
So you have a sequence of events here where Pharaoh, in each of these instances, is like, well, I think my magicians are frogs. I think my magicians can do that. Hey, magicians, can you bring frogs? And they're like, man, we can bring frogs. But then when they get to I think that happened with the blood, same thing. When they get to the third plague, though, they can't recreate that. And so I have wondered before if there's a progression that God is working on here. And it's interesting to me that he distinguishes his people from the Egyptians at the same time that he removes the magician's ability to recreate. Because I don't think that the magicians are recreating the plagues unless God enables that. That's just my suspicion. But I've sat in discussions before, and I wasn't here Sunday morning, so I don't want to talk about this, but I've sat in discussions before about why were the magicians able to recreate these things that God was using as demonstrations of his power. Well, my thought is that that's always been a part of the process that God is using to turn Pharaoh into a extremely he's already a stubborn dude. He already sees himself as deity on some level, wants to be seen as deity. He already says things like, I don't know this God that you're talking about. I mean, he's already a very arrogant, hard-headed, stubborn man. But I feel like God is working that stubbornness, almost whipping it into a frenzy, with the fact that the magicians could recreate these plagues, and the plagues were affecting not just the Egyptians, but the Israelites as well. And if I had to guess, the effect of that on the mind of this man was, I'm still a little skeptical of this whole thing. As my Egyptians are doing it, and the Israelites are suffering as well. But there's a point at which that stops. So, I don't know, but I've suspected that that was just part of the process through which God was making Pharaoh as stubborn as he needed him to be in order to do all the things that he wanted to do.
Yeah, there's a lot of good comments Dan mentioned there about just like how Pharaoh's heart gets hardened through this, and why would God start with 2 plagues and what does it mean by the term that they were able to recreate them? If the water is all in blood already, how do they make it in blood also? Like, I don't really understand what that means. And if the land is covered in frogs, how do they also recreate frogs? Part of, and it's just like, why would God do signs that he knows they can replicate on those for replicate, or however that occurred? It is kind of a strange thing. If he is trying to display his power, if these magicians can do it, like, is he getting his point across there? I've always found that kind of interesting, but also I think that's a good point of like how some of that just seems to be a part of Pharaoh's reaction to all of this as well, and hardening of his heart as well. But that does stop, as Dan mentioned, and John mentioned this all the way back at the beginning. Eventually, those magicians are like, this is God, right? Like, their response is, this is God. And that's what God is kind of trying to get to, not just the magicians, but Pharaoh, the Israelites, all of Egypt, to understand, is kind of come to, this is God taking place here. Go ahead, John.
Now, let's not forget the plan of God in the first place. When he was talking with Moses and Aaron in the first place, he said he would harden Pharaoh's heart. He would make him harder and harder to convince. And he even said there will come to a time whenever I will attack the firstborn, and then he will let my people go.
Yeah, so, I mean, this whole process and what's being done here, Pharaoh's going to have this rebellious heart throughout it all. And, I find it difficult sometimes, like, what does it fully mean? And I know this is tied to Dan's comment here as well, of like, is that go against God's nature to make his heart harden in such a way that he, continues to rebel? Like, then is it really Pharaoh rebelling, or is it God doing this? And I guess I know we kind of briefly touched on this maybe a few classes ago about, looking at the hardening of Pharaoh's heart that's going to be popping up here. And I believe this is Pharaoh's wickedness being done here. This is not a story of like, hey, Pharaoh was, stubborn and God's just going to make it to where, like, even if he wanted to, like, I'm not going to let him, let him go until I want him to. Because that would be like, okay, is God then controlling his actions? Does he have free will? Or I don't think it's a matter of that. I do think kind of what Dan's saying about the circumstance that happens, that God allows to happen, has this effect on Pharaoh. But Pharaoh, it's important to note, if he chose to, he could have let the people go. I don't think it's God being just, let me sarcastically send you guys up there. I know he's going to say no matter what, but like, let's just kind of, as a joke, send you up there, and then when he says no, I'll turn the water to blood, and then I'll bring out the frogs, I'll bring out the gnats. Like, I don't think it's that. I don't think, God doesn't treat our souls so lightly as if to mock them, right? I don't believe that. But I do believe, like, and I can't remember who mentioned this, but there's a long-suffering nature to God throughout this story. I do believe he is, if the Egyptians saw and they turned and heck, they, painted the doorpost and all that, I think that, God would have delivered them, same as he delivered the Israelites. But, Pharaoh continues to choose to rebel. He continues to defy God. He's faced with these things to the point where I do think he's either going to let them go or he has to harden his heart so much. Like he has to be so incredibly rebellious to say no again. Like, it's just, it's funny. Just as a sports guy, it's just so funny to read, like, when your team's bad, you kind of mockingly read posts about other teams or whatever. And, I saw this post of, this team who'd, gotten beat by both teams on the screen. And they're just like, wow, look at these two bum schools here. Just terrible. And like underneath it had a caption of like their score versus those other two teams just getting beaten by like 5 or 6 touchdowns each. And it's just like, the idea to just be able to look at the scene before him and continue to turn away and be like, really continue asking, who is this God? Like, why would I answer to him? Each time you just have to keep tearing away even more and continue to just harden up that heart. And I mentioned a couple of different verses of how it talks about the Israelites trying to avoid that. Hey, don't harden your heart as in the day of the rebellion, right? They did that. They are going to do that in the wilderness, right? We can do that same thing by continually just defying God. We just continue to harden the heart. Now, Pharaoh's really having to turn away and defy God with some incredible signs on display, but it's the same process that we have now when we turn away from God. When we rebel from God, we do the same thing. Our heart just continues to solidify and doesn't allow the message that God is trying to get across to sink in. And that message, I do still think, is that common theme of, you're going to know who I am. Like, who am I? I am the Lord. I am that I am. Like, he's not letting that sink in. He's refusing to let that sink in. And he's not letting it change his heart. And so, I know another chapter here with these plagues, but I keep seeing that pop up as I'm reading through this. God's giving him these chances. I believe God loved Pharaoh as much as he loved anybody. And I'm sure it hurts God to see Pharaoh turn away. Any child of God to turn away from him. And yet we're getting this continual message of Pharaoh just keeps hardening his heart to the truth. Go ahead, Dan.
Much more than the things that we say and the things that we do, and I'm not suggesting that what we say and what we do is not important, but much more important than those things to God is what's going on inside our hearts. And throughout this process, God is responding to what's going on inside Pharaoh's heart. Pharaoh says some things, and he does some things, but the heart of Pharaoh is in his heart. So I think it's appropriate to look at, when God says, I'm going to harden his heart, he's not going to let your people go. God is not making the statement that I'm going to force him to act against his will. What God is saying is, I'm going to make it so that he's strong enough to carry you through with the desires of his heart. And the desires of his heart are to be rebellious against me. The desires of his heart are to keep my people enslaved and be cruel and inhumane to them. So throughout the process, God is reacting to what's going on in Pharaoh's heart. He is not forcing Pharaoh ever to act against Pharaoh's own heart. If anything, he is enabling the desires of Pharaoh's heart with maybe a little bit of circumstantial encouragement here and there. And the lesson I take away from Pharaoh is be careful who you want to be, because God might let you.
Eric?
I think maybe a New Testament verse that kind of depicts the same thing is Romans 1:28. Since they didn't think it was worthwhile to acknowledge God, God abandoned them to a defective mind to do inappropriate things. Pretty much sums it up. That's a little different translation. It's pretty much exactly what Pharaoh was doing.
Yeah. My version's, I feel like the version I know, is that the gives them up to their own lusts, kind of, yeah, that same, like,
Give them over to a depraved mind.
yeah. I was trying not to say that, like, you have the wrong version. Like my correct version says something like, but I was like, oh, I like that phrasing, but it is that idea of like, eventually if they just keep rebelling, like, you can stand there with your hand out and what, but like eventually, yeah, I give you over to it. And I think, that's why it's like going back to Genesis, that story with Cain is so much kind of the early, is just like, you don't do this, like this is what leads to that. And I feel like Pharaoh is almost the progression beyond that rebellion of just like, and I think Dan said it as well, both of your comments of just like, your heart has been set, and I'm kind of giving you over to that. And these circumstances, they, while they could, you have gotten to a point where you've allowed it to actually set yourself even more solidified in your position.
Maybe a different way to look at it is God gave Pharaoh 10 opportunities
That's what I was
to
gonna
do the
say.
right thing.
That's the long suffering, and that's in Second Thessalonians, God's gonna say, hey, you're lost, there's no turning back. I'm gonna send delusions and make you believe a lie, because that's where you're headed. And that's where Pharaoh is headed. But he gave them those 10 chances. He still gave them those chances to turn out, and he did.
Yeah, I think that's well said. Just multiple opportunities here. But for him, it was just continuing to show his resolve in his own rebellion, right? And even as the magicians see it, this is the finger of God. Pharaoh's heart was hardened. He would not listen to them as the Lord had said. And then we even get to, the flies, which we haven't talked a ton about, but also covering everything, sends the swarm all over the place, in all the houses, on the ground, like everywhere. And yet again, he asks to be delivered from that, and yet again goes against his word. Even though Moses says, hey, don't cheat by not letting the people go to sacrifice, and yet Pharaoh hardens his heart again and doesn't let the people go. So it is a really drawn out, sad story of a man who just won't see reason. And I don't want to say I've gotten 10 plagues, but I've gotten plenty of signs when I've, been in bad places of just like, stop. And it's funny how you see those signs, and in some ways it, I don't know if this is fully the same process of hardening the heart, but it's just like, it almost is just kind of another point where you're just like, I don't want to, like almost a point of telling yourself, I don't want to, I'm not going to. Like where God gives you these things to say like, hey, I'm not just going to let you coast the whole time. Like, I'm going to give you these signposts to let you know. But then I think that Romans 1, what Eric brought up is sometimes, God's just like, okay, I'll give you over to it. And I don't think that means you've reached the point of no return and now there's no hope for salvation for your soul. But it's just like you've totally given over into your own desires, your own lusts, your own passions. And, those signs aren't going to hit the same way in which they originally did. And I think I've been that person, and I've seen people go through that. And all you want to do is to help someone out of that, but sometimes you can't get them to see, right? They're just totally absorbed in that wickedness, and it's like a helpless feeling. It's a helpless feeling. Go ahead, John.
My King James version says lions instead of gnats. I can accept lions better than gnats from the depth of the ground.
Yeah, I think I could do okay with lice. I thought it was kind of interesting, and I hadn't remembered this part either, but the dust of the earth, so it will become gnats, right? Think about just the multitude of dust, and it's like that becomes the gnats, right? And that almost, it doesn't use the same imagery of like covering the whole earth or anything, but the frame of all the dust of the earth became gnats in the land of Egypt. Like, that's a pretty incredible imagery there as well. All right, guys, we'll be picking up in chapter 9. The next week's questions are back in the back if you want to pick those up. Thanks, everybody, for your comments.